Okay, so we're here with Gary Opit, just outside of his property, where he says he's seen Njimbin trapped here. Gary, can you please tell me a bit more about them?
Yes, so this is where I found a very interesting stick pyramid, a little stick tripod or pyramid on the 12th of September 2008 on this track here at Wuyang, and that was situated right where Jack's standing. And in those days, in 2008, we'd had a long drought. There was no vegetation. This was a muddy track, and there was tracks of dingoes and swamp wallabies and bandicoots and brush turkeys, but there was no human footprints on the track. No one often walks this track. Occasionally cyclists come by. And I found this little stick tripod there of 4 sticks, a bit like a little teepee. They're only about 30 centimetres high. It was very small. And here we have a wheel rut, 2 wheel ruts. In that wheel rut there was nothing, but in this wheel rut, and there was no grass of any kind, it was just mud, it was covered in little footprints. And in this photo you can see all the footprints, and somebody or something had been grabbing lumps of mud and throwing it out all over the place and running backwards and forwards, leaving little footprints, like a child's footprints, with these little footprints. And here you can see the big toe and the 4 smaller toes, and every print had been run over, so this was the only print where you could clearly see the toes. Otherwise you could just see disturbed prints. And the Njimbin, which are probably or very possibly Homo floresiensis, the hobbit that was found in the island of Flores, Indonesia. The Aboriginal people talk of little hairy men, little hairy people, and in this area they call them Njimbin, which is the town of Njimbin's named after. And I've talked to a National Park ranger who's actually seen one cross the road, and I've also heard a series of fabulous calls, which I think might have been made by this the Njimbin or Njimbin or hobbit or little hairy man. And it goes a bit. There was a whole series of barks, about 100 barks, that went aroo, 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 and then gurgle, and then aroo, 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 like about 100 of those over about 5 minutes. And no animal makes a call like that. I'm a biologist, and I make my living identifying the calls of animals and birds, etc., to do fauna surveys. Anyway, I think I have a drawing here somewhere of. So this was an actual drawing done by Joshua Clark, and he and his mother saw this little hairy person or hobbit on the 23rd of March 1996, and they thought it was a child running towards them. It stood about 1.25 metres tall, and it came running towards them, and when it saw them it dropped onto its 4 legs and walked like a chimpanzee, and then it walked around them. It was like only 10, 20 metres, 30 feet from them or something. It walked around them and then it got back up onto its hind legs. So that was both bipedal and quadrupedal. So I haven't seen one myself, but this is the kind of reports that I've received on my ABC Wildlife Talkback Wildlife Wednesday radio program that I've been doing for 20 years, a weekly program. And over those 20 years I've received 1,500 phone calls, and we've described 360 different species of animals we've identified, people have described, and about 150 phone calls of those, say, 1,500 phone calls and emails have been on animals unknown to science. And of course I'm not going to tell them that I don't believe them, because they seem to be sincere. They're often talking about their reports, their sightings with other people listening on the radio. Often their farmer neighbours phone up and say they've seen the same animal. So that's the Njimbin, and just further along here we'll go for a little walk and we'll look at the site where I had a close encounter with what appeared to be the Yowie, or Thylacines as it's also known. So we'll go on to that spot now.
So we're here at another location. Gary says that he's had Thylacine encounters and a Yowie encounter at this very spot. So tell me a bit about that, Gary.
Okay, so we're right where we're standing now. We're on the tracks of that Finding Bigfoot team that filmed me for that Finding Bigfoot Aussie special, and they were interested in that because I had quite a remarkable encounter with which is probably the Yowie, that amazing human hairy animal. I think it's most likely Homo Denisovan, because they found Denisovan DNA in Aboriginal people and New Guinean people, and also the Sherpas in the Himalayas. And it's an only recently discovered species of human, only known from a finger bone and 2 teeth. But so I had an amazing encounter here. I think it was in 2008. I've got the date, and in my book Australian Cryptozoology I described the encounter along with many others that have been reported to me. But I was here just at dusk. There were no cicadas calling like there are at the moment. You can hear black print cicadas calling. But so it was just last light. It was still fully daylight, but you know, the sun was very low, bit of sunset in the sky. And my dog Banjo and I were walking along the track here, and we began to hear the movement of a very large animal pushing its way through the bush towards us from maybe 60 metres or so in, to the right there. And so I thought at first maybe it's a cow that had got loose from the farm, which is only half a kilometre from here, and then there was a big crack, like a tree knock or a crack, like as if it had stepped on a broken, had fallen stick and it had cracked. But then there were more of these loud crack-like sounds, and I realised, no, this was something coming towards us, either a person or a Yowie or something that could only have been holding 2 sticks in its hand and cracking them together. So, and it approached me over about 10 minutes, cracking these sticks together, not rhythmically, always at completely alternative times, so maybe every 20 seconds or then 30 seconds or 40 seconds or 10 seconds, so it was irregular, but very loud and distinct, and my dog began barking at it because it was frightened that something was coming through the bush, and I yelled at the dog, quiet, don't stop that. And then I thought, it knows that we're here now, because I just figured it was a big animal pushing its way through it. It didn't know that we were here because we hadn't made any noise. And but it didn't make any difference, and it continued to approach us, making this loud cracking noise every now and then. And the dog barked a second time. I told it to be quiet a second time. Still didn't make any difference, and it got up to within 10 or 12, 15 metres. It moved to the right, and then it came back this way. And then I was looking with my binoculars, and I could see a movement. It looked like brown fur, orangey brown fur, or something like that, moving through the vegetation. You can see that the vegetation's all paper bark. So if it was somebody with a stick whacking it against the trunk, it wouldn't make any sound at all. And there's no broken. There's all the sticks there. It's all pretty sodden, and you can see it's an understory of sedges. Of different species, and then it's a middle story of a plant called Bakia. Some people call it Bakia, and tea trees with an overstory of paperbark trees. And anyway, finally got to within, I couldn't tell, 6, 7, 8, 9 metres in, and then it stopped, and then I pushed my way in to try to get a close look at it, and it must have just moved off in front of me, but it made no sound departing. So it made a lot of noise crashing through the vegetation and whacking these 2 sticks together, making this loud crack noise. Exactly the same sound as if I get 2 sticks and whack them together, it would sort of sounds like that as it pushed through the bush. Now I'm positive a person couldn't, because it's very hard to push through that bush. And then I went after it and followed it, and I could only move through that bush because I was following the trail that it had pushed through. Now no person could push through a trail like that, and it definitely wasn't an animal, like a known animal like a cow or something. Plus they don't push their way through dead bush normally anyway, but if it was a cow I'd have been able to find it, but there wouldn't have been that loud clacking noise as if two sticks were being hit together, what generally referred to as tree knocks. So yeah, so a very remarkable encounter. I followed it in quite a distance, and I found what looked like its bed, a whole area of broken banksia wood from a rotted banksia tree, and it was lying on the ground just like in the perfect shape of a bed, but there was no sign of anything having been lying on it or any hair or anything at all. And then you know, pushed my way back out because I had to get home before it was dark. But that was my the nearest encounter I've had to what's generally referred to as a yowie, these big hairy animals known to Aboriginal people in this area as doolagals. They call the males doolagals and the females mahinas. And there's various other Aboriginal names for them. Charawara is another name. But also this is where I encountered a black thylacine or thylacine, generally known as the Tasmanian tiger, and I've encountered that 3 times. The first time was on the road, and I've got a drawing of it. I've seen this animal 3 times here and once earlier, and that's what it looked like. So it was on the 3rd of February 2007, and it was a very dark furred, unidentifiable carnivorous marsupial, 1.5 to 2 metres long, quite a big animal. So it stood about this high off the ground, like, you know, about say 70, 80 centimetres high. It had a bulging at one. This is I've drawn it just as it began to run off. But when I first saw it, it had a very bulging back, as in the diagram I did in the diary. And the only animal that has that shape is the Tasmanian tiger or thylacine. And they've got a very supple spine, and there's photographs and film footage of Benjamin, the last Tasmanian tiger, in the Hobart Zoo, in that exact posture where it was bent over like that. And when I first saw it, it was at night, just early evening. I drove up to within about 10 metres of it, and it was in the headlights, and it took no notice of the car, and it was busy sniffing the road. And at first I thought it was a swamp wallaby, which looks very similar in colour and about the same size. And I expected it to stand up and hop off, because we get swamp wallabies here. But it didn't move, and then as I got up to it, I realised that the front legs and the hind legs were about the same size, and it looked as if it was a quite thickly furred, all dark brown thylacine, or Tasmanian tiger, the mainland variety, which is supposed to be extinct for 3,000 years. Anyway, I saw that animal then subsequently right here on the track. Once again, just walking. I was actually on my bicycle riding back from the beach here, and I stopped to pick up a stick that had fallen across the track, and I saw the animal jump right across the track in one bound, right in front of me, and it was the same animal that I'd seen previously, and then it didn't make any noise coming and any noise going, so it definitely wasn't a swamp wallaby, because you can hear them going thump, thump, thump like that as they hop along, making a loud thumping noise. This made no sound coming or going, and then not long afterwards I've explored this bush quite thoroughly, and I came across it resting on a bit of a vegetated sand dune beside the creek, and it jumped up, it looked at me, and then it bounded off. And when it ran off on all fours. And then I had not long after, a few months later, I had a person listening to my radio show describe exactly the same animal with its great long tail across the track. They were jogging along, not this track, but another track further along, but not far from here, and they were jogging, and they saw this, what looked like a branch sticking out across the track, like this long tail, because that's held above the ground. They're about that high, and they slowed down because they're going to grab the stick or jump over it. They suddenly realised it was the tail of an animal and it was eating something, and it suddenly spun around and jumped across the track. And they phoned me and told me this bizarre animal. And interestingly enough, I've received several reports over the years in this very locality of Thylacines, Tasmanian tigers, or Thylacines as it's also called, and the descriptions were usually either the normal colour of a thylacine with the brown with the black stripes on the rump, or they've seen it as all been all brown, but when they've got close, they've seen that the stripes were actually just a pale brown that was almost the same colour as the background fur. So it seems as if the animal can come in a number of colour phases, as would be expected, because thylacines have existed on this continent. They evolved here, they've been here for at least 40, 50 million years. There was a number of different species, some are as small as a fox and others as bigger than a dingo. Thylacine fossils have been found in New Guinea, in the rainforests in New Guinea, all over Australia and Tasmania, but they're the only living examples have ever been actually shot or snared or captured alive came from Tasmania, hence the name Tasmanian tiger. But of course, originally lived all over Australia. The latest known fossils are about 3,000 years old, but there were reports of thylacines by the early settlers in the Blue Mountains, even them being shot and pelts recovered, and also in South Australia. But I've received many reports of thylacine-like animals, but with bushy tails. These ones are on Tambourine Mountain, and that one was seen in 1990. And these are various other ones that were seen by different people and describing the same, very similar, and giving drawings. That one was seen by Phil Manning. But I saw that animal as well much earlier. And this is that's the original drawing I did of it. This is 69, I saw it. I got a real close view of it. And it looked very much like a thickly furred thylacine or thylacine, Tasmanian tiger, with a thickly furred tail with bars on the tail, and sort of the bars on the body were relatively indistinct. And an artist by the name of Jeff Johnson redrew my drawing, and so that's pretty much what it looked like as it crossed the road. But I mean, I still don't have no idea what it was, except I think it's probably the same animal that I saw here 3 times. So I've only seen it 4 times. And maybe comes in, unless it's a completely different animal. And the other possibility is it's the marsupial lion, Thylacines carnifex. However, there's no recent fossils of that species less than about 40,000 years or 35, 38,000 years, where of course we know the thylacine or thylacine existed here up until 3,000 years. So anyway, we still don't really know what it was, except that it's a carnivorous marsupial. It had a very distinctive waddling gait of the hindquarters, and of course the marsupial lion is actually related to the possums. The thylacine is actually related to the quolls, and they have backward-facing pouches, so they carry their young in their pouches, and they're not related to dogs or dingoes or tigers or anything else. They're carnivorous marsupials. Also in this area, this is a drawing of another thylacine-like animal seen by a good friend of mine who's his name's Mike Stubbs, and he and his wife saw that from a metre away at 3 in the morning on the 15th of January 2006 at 3:30 a.m. From a metre away. They got a perfect view of it, and it looked. And there's a drawing, it looked very much like a normal coloured thylacine, but with very indistinct stripes or bands on the rump. And other people have seen and reported. I've received maybe 40 sightings from just this area alone in Byron Shire, and they see the sightings mainly come from the nature reserves along the coast. So they seem to like this habitat, this sandy Wallam forest, littoral rainforests and paperbark forest, and the heathlands. I've received lots of reports between Lennox Head and Byron Bay, from reports by zoologist Mary Gardner from Byron Bay itself, and also from another Byron Bay animal expert, a vet nurse who had a very close encounter with one at 6 in the morning, described it in great detail, and she's worked as a vet nurse for 20 years, and she said no doubt about it, was definitely the thylacine, the amazing animal that's supposed to be extinct. The reason they seem to be able to survive, they originally thought that they hunted big animals because they're quite a largish animal, about the size of a large dog roughly, but in fact the studies of their jaws have shown that they cannot hunt large animals, that their jaws are relatively weak. Unlike the Tasmanian devil's jaws that are powerful and chomp up everything, thylacine jaws are weak, and that they couldn't have preyed on anything larger than a rabbit, a possum, or a little bandicoot, or a small wallaby. There's no way they could take a sheep or any larger animal, and so they generally thought they must be extinct because it was believed that they were hunting sheep, but the studies of the records of thylacines in Tasmania showed they never hunted sheep. There was no records of them killing sheep, and they were just used as a scapegoat whenever the farmers lost sheep, mainly to weather or to or dogs or what have you, mainly bad weather. Then they'd blame the thylacines, and they were able to encourage the the Tasmanian government to put a bounty on the heads of them. But in fact, there seems to be actually, they weren't hunted to extinction as often said, because most of Tasmania you couldn't get into, and they're still reported in those localities. It was a disease that devastated their numbers, exactly the same way that a disease is devastating the Tasmanian devils at the moment, because these animals, because they're in isolated relic populations in Tasmania, they don't have a very diverse genetics, and so are vulnerable to exotic diseases from the rest of the world.
And so do you believe that it's most likely for the thylacine to be on the mainland now than in Tasmania, or?
I think, yes. I think that Tasmania has very few thylacines or thylacines, Tasmanian tigers, because of the restricted habitat. But I do believe they still exist there, particularly in the southwest. And I've had reports from them in that locality. They seem to live in very large territories like most carnivores. So unlike herbivores like kangaroos, we get large numbers. You only get you might get one pair of thylacines for maybe, who knows, 100 square kilometres or something or other, which they'll hunt through, and they're nocturnal ambush predators. So the chance of encountering one is remote. But it's somewhat similar to the chance of encountering a dingo. We have dingoes living here, and what chance do you have of bumping into a dingo in the bush? To actually see one while you're bushwalking is quite a rare phenomena. But in Australia, I've received reports, and other researchers like yourself have received reports of thylacines right across the country, from the deserts, from the inland right into the rainforests and the eucalypt forests and the heathlands. And because of the vastness of the Australian continent and such vast areas that virtually no one's trodden on, like you could say most of the Great Dividing Range, you've got a few roads and a few walking tracks, but most of the rest of the countryside, like hardly anyone's ever been through, and even if you do walk through, the chance of seeing anything's remote. I've got reports from Cape York Peninsula, lots of reports from eastern New South Wales, Queensland, Sunshine Coast, and in 1981-82 I spent 6 months chasing thylacine and panther sightings, as well as mainly doing fauna and flora surveys in the national parks all through Victoria and South Australia, 1981-82. So I received I received a few reports in Tasmania. I spent 1.5 years in Tasmania. Received a few reports in Tasmania, but nothing compared to the number of reports I've received on the mainland. So I believe that the thylacine or thylacine is probably more abundant on the mainland than in Tasmania. But still, you might have one pair in a mountain range, you know, 100 square kilometres or something.
Yeah.